Pat was really involved with the council in the sense that he was always science-based, science-oriented. He sent in all his sablefish tags. He was always really interested in the council process, but he was also always out working. He was always out fishing. And Pat, for me, was always somebody I really admired. I liked his approach to everything he was doing. He worked in the most challenging environments, anywhere in Alaska. And still, I mean, Pat was someone I always admired, but now truly Pat is just one of my heroes. I mean, his attitude, his approach to life is just inspiring all the time. So I think Pat should take it away. I'm really glad so many people participated. I know there's a lot of friends here. We all know Pat. We've all probably seen little bits and pieces of that, but of this we're about to see, but we've never seen it all, or at least I've never seen it all together. So, and Barb at his side, thank you so much for doing this. It means a lot to us, and I'm sure we're going to have a great evening. So Pat, take it away.
All right.
Good job.
I guess we'll start by thinking it's really awesome to have the North Pacific Council in Homer. And for me, being somewhat recognized is like kind of weird. I'm just another guy that there's 30 other guys out here in this crowd that I know that have stories that would last you a lifetime if you wanted to listen to them. And I guess they figure I'm the biggest bullshitter in the whole crowd. So they elected me to come do this crap, so here I am. And I've done it a number of times for Islands and Oceans on seabirds and different groups of people that I've done this at the church and a couple other places. So kind of hard to figure out. The wheelhouse to wheelchair thing is I fished for 33 years or something before I was injured in a car accident, and I broke my neck at C4, which is right about your Adam's apple. And when you're C4, I didn't even know what a quadriplegic was. I mean, I'd never been around anybody even in a wheelchair. It was like, holy cow. All of a sudden, our whole life just like turned upside down. And for my family and my wife and son, it was like too much, It was just like over the top. Because I figured my whole life I was invincible. I mean, I don't need to get all choked up about this, but it's hard to talk about, especially when you've had an accident. Then it's really hard to talk about. And I've had a number of them in my life, and I thought that I was Mr. Invincible when I was 15, 18, and I had a super ego, thought I could not be stopped, and I learned to go the other way around about that. But anyway, getting on to the fishing story, and just to tell you a little bit about quadriplegia, which I didn't know anything about what a quadriplegic was. My injury is at my Adam's apple, C4 and C5, which is your cervical spine. Christopher Reeve was C3, C4. He lived on a respirator for the rest of his life until he died. And I was just one below that. So C4 controls your hands and your fingers, and anything below that is C5, 6, 7, 8, and then you go down onto your spine. So somebody in the back is waving. Can you not hear? Or are you just being a heckler? I know those hecklers back there, okay. Anyway, so just to give you a little more information about spinal cord injury, when you injure yourself at the level that I did, it was like 4 months in rehab, 3 months in critical care. All I can tell you is it sucks. It's not fun. And it's, here's my wife, Barbara, of 42 years. And she's my angel. She's my angel. I gotta watch out being too emotional here, but anyway, let's get on with the bullshit that I gotta tell you about. So I'll go on with that. I just wanted you to know that from a spinal cord injury at my level, I have no feeling below my armpits. I have no sense of temperature. You can put my hand in boiling water. We went to UCLA and dedicated ourselves as a test dummy for a group of 200 people, and had every scientist, every smart person in the world working on me. And I told him, I said, all I want is my hands. Just give me my hands back. And 3 years living in LA, and they couldn't do it. So I told them, all right, I'm going back to Homer, and I'm gonna learn to live my life living in a wheelchair, because I thought I was gonna get up and walk again. And that never really happened. So, you know, there's somebody got to brush my teeth, feed me every day, pick me up, put me in a wheelchair, put me in bed, you know, Hoyer lift overhead. Barbara does all that. We have a caregiver that helps us 5 hours a day, and she's awesome. And it's kind of hard for me, because Barbara has to live my life. And I don't like that, but that's the way it is. So that's what we do, and we just live day to day and try to get by. And this community, and I mean, there's like been 5 doctors been in my house and make house calls. I mean, it's just unbelievable the people that reach out to me. Fishermen that I haven't talked to in 20 years, because once we started with the Judy B, we were catcher processor, then we were brand X. We had no relations with any of the buyers or anything else. We had our market in Japan, so we dealt with Japan. And they, you know, so all these guys that were my seining buddies and everything I dealt with the Invader years ago, and I was like gone for 25 years, because we were out in the Aleutians with the Judy B. And it was like we were just one boat, one catcher processor. We didn't have any partner boats. And that's kind of the way it all started, and the way it all worked out. So anyway, Barb's giving me, I'll open in my computer so I'll see where I'm at, so I'm not jabbering too long here. Okay, I'm on. I'm all right, so we're gonna move on to our start. I grew up on the Chesapeake Bay as a kid. That was the first 18, 20 years of my life. My big brother took me to Alaska when I was 11, and he and I drove a pickup truck, and we had a canoe on top, and we went all the way across Canada, and we fished and canoed and made 3 weeks across America into Alaska, and I'm thinking, holy cow, look at this place. And I grew up in a little town that was called Pocosin, and it was an Indian name for low swamplands, and all the fishermen there on the Chesapeake Bay, they had biceps like footballs, and they had hands like catcher's mitts. And I mean, these guys were just like the toughest, and I just loved that. I thought that was the coolest thing I ever seen, and I wanted to be one of them. But it was like 1970, and their industry in the Chesapeake Bay of being oyster fishermen, crab fishermen, was dying. So then when I came to Alaska with my big brother at 11, and then I came back when I was 15 and when I was 16 in the summers. I don't know how my mom and dad let me even go with him, but he was my mentor, and it was like awesome. And we took off, and here we go across Alaska, and we put the canoe on that camphor shell, and away we went. And so I came back the other 2 summers. In the meantime, in the summers, I would fish with the commercial watermen there, and I just loved it. And so then I guess after that point in time, I came back after I graduated from high school. Then I had to figure out if I was going to Alaska or I was going to get a college degree, and I ended up going into an apprentice program for 4 years as a shipwright. And that was the biggest shipyard in the world at the time. And they started in like 1890, when there were still square riggers in the dry docks. And so I worked there for 4 years. There was no summer break, so I could not come back to Alaska, which was kind of killing me. I wanted to come back to Alaska, but I finished, got my degree, and you get a 2-year degree after 4 years of no summer break, but half the day you were in the classroom, half the day you were on the ship with an apprentice instructor. And so they were the #1 apprentice program in the nation at the time. And there was like only 800 of us. And the guys that were really good in school, they sent them straight to MIT after 2 years, because they figured they were going to be their draftsmen and their designers and their engineers coming down the line, because they were building nuclear aircraft carriers and submarines and every kind of thing. So when I got out of there after 4 years, the day I graduated, I boogied to Alaska, because I already knew what it was. And Barbara happened to be the secretary at the apprentice school for 800 guys who were apprentices. And that was the days when she was wearing hot pants. So every guy in the whole place was after the 3 girls that were working in the office. And so I had a long relationship with another girl in high school, and I said, look, we got to break this off, because I'm going to Alaska when I get through. And so we did, and about a month before I left, I met Barbara. And I went, oh man, don't do this. So I told her when I left, I packed up the day I graduated, and I packed up and drove to Alaska. And I told her, I says, well, maybe I'll send you a plane ticket. So after about 3 months of being here, my brother sent me up into the wilderness up there to build a camp with Kevin Seidlinger and myself. And we went up there, and it was 49 inches of snow on the lake. And Barbara sending me letters from Virginia, and Bill the Crefts dropping them in an airplane, you know, and we're living up there in the snow and trying to build a cabin. And when we got out of there, man, I sent her a plane ticket immediately. And her poor mom, she thought, oh my God, you're gonna go up there with igloos and Eskimos and polar bears, and her family was like 4 generations old in the East Coast, you know, and those people, they never moved, they never left. It was like, what are you doing? So she came up, she told me, I'm gonna spend 1 year. And I picked her up on the Homer Spit in a Lund skiff with a 15 horsepower motor, and she had just flown all the way from Virginia with 3 suitcases, and I took her back across the bay into Chinapoot, where Mike and Diane had already started. And that's kind of where it all began. So where are you on pictures there? Yeah, you can move that one. So these pictures, that was the first place we ever had right there. And Mike and Diane gave that to us as a wedding present and a piece of land that it was on, and that's where we started. And 10 years later, we kind of developed it into that next picture. And 30 years later, we developed it into that picture. And on the next picture, I think you can see the old pilot house sitting on the dock. And that's the pilot house off of the Invader that was built in 1923 that Dan Verheusen and Debbie had bought and asked us to be partners in. So we took the pilot house off there, put it on my dock, and turned it into a sauna, which probably quite a few of you have been in and out of through the years and probably don't want to admit it, but anyway. And from there, this was the first skiff I ever purchased. Go back one. Oh, you got it, Barb. Yeah, right there. And there's my grandson and me in the wheelchair there. It's sitting in my front yard, because we retired it after I flipped it over. And we've been in Chinapoot for 7 or 8 years. I don't often, I mean, it was probably 8 years before Barb and I could even talk about this. It was so freaking scary to all of us. That was, you know, his son, maybe all of you have had a tragic moment in your life, and you just can't go back there, you don't want to remember it, or it's just like you block it out. Just like my rollover accident when I was injured in a car accident. We rarely ever talk about that. It's pretty scary stuff. But anyway, that skiff, my dad loaned me $500 and it was $1,800, and a guy in Kodiak, Ed Opine, built the skiff. And at that time, that was a skiff to have in Homer, Alaska. And we thought it was awesome. And anyway, I put a center console in it, got it all dolled up, and that's the remains of it after I flipped it over in China Poot Rip. And its name was the Peacemaker from China Poot. And so one morning, I'm ready to leave the cabin, and it's blowing. It had been a nasty night out. Dave Moran called me up and said he had a moose down out at Fox River, and he said he saw a brown bear right before he was taking his first quarter of meat out. I said, well, I'll come over there and help you in the morning, and we'll get it out of there. So the next morning I get up, go out in the front, China Poot, which is very notorious, known rip in sandbars and very dangerous. But I mean, I've been living there, so I know everything there is to know about China Poot Bar, right? So it's October about right now, and I looked, and boy, there's a standing rip across the whole sandbar, except where the channel went out. So I stopped and I idled and I counted the waves and I watched the break, and it was a period of 7 waves, and when the 7th wave came through, then I darted into that rip that was like maybe as wide as this room is. And I had to get through there to get out, and that was the only deep water, everything else was sand. And right when I moved into the rip, here comes a big comber and catches me, and so I go up and over it and quarter it on the bow so I wouldn't get flipped. And I thought, okay, I'm gonna make it through this green water, and it was a place that wasn't ripping. And then as soon as I looked again, here comes another one, so I had to run like 50 yards from the breaker to try to get the green water to get over the top of it. When I got over the top of it, the next one just swallowed me and took me up on the side. I tucked my head and went in the water and thought the console or the boat's gonna hit me when we're in the water, and it didn't. Make a long story short of this, I swam back to the boat. 100 yards from me was the cliffs of Moosehead Point at the entrance to China Poot that were gonna be a meat grinder. And I had a Stormy Seas jacket on, and it had a full cord for your CO2 to blow your vest up. But I had just come back from Dutch Harbor, and the flight at the security took the CO2 chamber from me, because you can't have that on the boat, on the plane, right? And me not thinking I know that, I should have put a new one in it the next morning. I didn't, so I'm pulling on a cord, it's not working. So I go to the blow-up tube, and I blow the blow-up tube, and the skiff is like the corner of that table right here in front of me. That's all that's sticking out of the water, and the 70-horse engine's holding the boat underwater. And I'm thinking there's an air pocket there, and I grab hold of it to hold it, and I don't know why, but in those days they would say you were 15 minutes in the water without a survival suit before it was going to take you out. And I was on that, hanging onto that little point of the boat for an hour and 52 minutes. And I looked at my watch when I turned the boat over, and I told my wife that morning, I said, I'll call you in an hour from the harbor. And I'm thinking, oh man, I did this just 10 minutes away from the house. I got 50 minutes before anybody's gonna start looking. I drifted all the way over towards Halibut Cove, hanging onto that boat, tied the bow line around my wrist because I figured for sure I was lost. And just for some reason, these hands that don't work, they work just fine. They were holding onto that boat. And I said every prayer in the world, especially to my mom, thinking, oh man, this could be terrible. And next thing you know, here comes these guys out of Peterson Bay in a little aluminum skiff, and they come down, they drive up next to me, and I'm hanging onto this skiff, and they're looking at me, and their eyes are like saucers. And they're looking at me, and I say, hey, did you guys bring the morning paper? I have no idea where that came from. They're looking at me like that. They grab me and throw me in the bottom of the skiff, and they cover me up in a tarp, and my teeth are shattering. I'm just rattling, and I say, take me over there to Peterson Bay, right next to the Center for Coastal Studies. The Center for Coastal Studies wasn't there in those days. And I said, just take me to the beach. I can walk home. Because by this time, building the craft and the Coast Guard and everybody's flying looking for me, but it was ebb tide, so they're all looking for me going the other way, and there's a back eddy that goes to Halibut Cove. So I'm looking at the Halibut Cove beach thinking, oh man, I'm really gonna get eat up in this spot. These guys pick me up, and when they picked me up, you know, I got to the beach. As soon as they hit the ground, I jumped out, and they go, "Where are you going? Where are you going?" "I'm going to the lodge." I said, "I'm going to the lodge right through this isthmus right here." I'm walking to the lodge, and I got out and started walking, and left them. And they're going, "Wait a minute." I'm going home. So there was nobody at the lodge. So I start out to the end of where our cabin was, and I'll never forget hollering through the woods to Barbara, and she was crying and screaming for me, hearing my voice, because they'd already been looking for me for an hour. And anyway, I got home and she stripped me down naked and put me in bed, and we got in bed and just held on to each other for 12 hours. And I was fine. And that's the end of that story. We gotta keep moving here, I'm talking too much. I wouldn't plan on getting all choked up, but I'm telling you, we never tell that story, hardly ever. It's too upsetting. So after the Peacemaker, we decided to go to an aluminum boat. Charlie Edwards and myself spent the winter building that. It's now set up where I can take my wheelchair over to Chinapoot, and that's it about that. And the next boat there coming up is the Invader. And Dan Verheusen and Debbie Verheusen asked us to be partners in that boat. And you know, I felt like in those days I was like always a green one and had all these mentors. You know, starting with my brother, and then there's these other guys, and there's people that are teaching me how to do stuff. And so Dan and Debbie asked us to be 10% partners in that, and it was like I had to go to the bank and tell him I was going to give him my skiff and my 300 rifle and my firstborn, you know. And it was like, man, he wouldn't want to give me very much money, and I'm going, daggone. So anyway, we did that for 4 years. During that time, huh? Oh, this picture was painted by Jim Bunsack, and we took the Invader over to McCarthy Glacier over in Nuka Bay where I was tendering, and I drove the boat right up in there next to the ice and got in a raft, and we paddled out and we took the picture. And I think in the pilot house was Barbara and my son, and anyway, then Jim painted it and made it like unbelievable painting. It's hanging in my living room. And it was on the front cover of National Fisherman. The boat was a 1923 seiner in Southeast when they hauled seines by hand. And so Danny and I fished it for crab, and we realized that the boat was kind of weak, so we had to take it to Seattle and get the bulwarks redone. So we put all new steel bulwarks in, new bow stem, and I moved Barbara and the family, and Dan moved his family, and we all go to Port Townsend. We thought, all right, Port Townsend. We go down there. We lived down there all winter and redid the boat, and then brought it back up and started fishing again. And that picture of Pat is, he took his first steps on the Invader, and there he is in the galley sink getting a bath. So anyway, after the Invader, I spent with Danny 4 years running it for crab, running it for tendering. We'd go to Togiak, we'd go to Kamishak, we'd go to Prince William Sound when there was the big herring fisheries in those days. And when you go to Togiak, there might be 400 boats, 30 ships, all ready for all these herring. And then we were working with Icicle at the time, and Don Giles, who is retired now, but was the head of Icicle, and Ralph Ward, and those guys were all out there with us. And I was following around the Judy B in this little old wooden seiner because I didn't know anything about anything. And the old timer that had the Judy B was named Arvid Blendheim, and he was a Norwegian. And the boat was built in Seattle at Jensen Marine, or Nichols Brothers. And so I got to be good friends with him. He was one of my mentors. He took me under his wing, and everywhere he went, I just followed him like a little duckling. and we were just buying fish from all the seiners that are here in Homer. So during those 4 years, I got to know all of you guys that were in town here and was fishing that way. And then 4 years later, I decided that tendering couldn't keep my finances going, and I moved over to midwater trawling in Kodiak. And at that time, then we moved over to Kodiak, and I think Barbara's got some pictures there, but maybe they're not the right ones now. Mine's not showing. All right, go ahead with yours. So that's a picture of the Judy B when she was all painted up and my son standing in front of it. And Arvid, he just kind of helped me all along through the way, and he's an amazing, amazing guy. And little did I know when I was pulling the Invader up next to that boat that it was like, I was gonna own this one day? Well, holy cow, how could that ever happen? And so after that happened, I went fishing in the Shelikof, because that was right when the Magnuson Act came through, and then we put the Japanese out to 200-mile limit, and there was all these fish in the Shelikof, and all the crabbers in Kodiak and everywhere around were trying to rig their boats up to go fishing midwater pollock in the Shelikof. So we were in the Shelikof, and this guy offered me a job to be engineer on a 98-foot bender, and I'm thinking, oh my God, Pat, you know enough about shipbuilding, you don't ever want to be on a 98-foot bender. I mean, these things were known for rolling over because they were built in Louisiana in the Gulf for shrimping. And a lot of guys brought them to Kodiak, and there was a lot of them. And a whole bunch of them are upside down in the bottom of the ocean right now. And I'm thinking, man, you went because you were going to make this big cruise share and go in the Shelikof, and there was so much fish in the Shelikof that you could drive the entire length of it and your bottom recorder would never be able to hit the bottom because it was solid pollock, just solid pollock. And there was guys that were new to it, and they put their net down in the water for like 30 minutes, and their bag would be so full they could barely lift it to the surface. And then when it came to the surface, it would burst on the surface because of the airbags, and the pollock would break, and they'd lift the bag up to the surface. And there's sea lions and killer whales, and the sea lions are climbing on the bag and growling and barking at us, and if the wind was right, you'd smell their breath, and it was horrible. and then next thing you know, you'd see the killer whales coming in, and there'd be a sea lion flying through the air, where they were flipping them with their tail, and I mean, it was just like this amazing feeding frenzy all over the Shelikof. And so I was in a group that was 8 of us that Hugh Riley had started with what they call the Tayo joint venture. And yeah, you can go to that if you want. And anyway, they had, there they are, they're the motherships. So these are the ships that were fishing in our waters until this council got together and said, no more. You can't fish within 200 miles of our limit. We own these waters. So then those ships decided that they make a joint venture with the American fishermen, and we would catch the fish and then give them to that big tramper there. Now that's a 300-foot ship with an 80-ton bag going up the stern that we had just given them. And so you'd put your net in the water in an hour, hour and a half, you'd have 80 tons. And it'd be so much fish that the Japanese always wanted a full bag. So there'd be so much fish that you'd let the fish go up into the intermediate net, and when you pull it to the stern, you'd open these zippers and you'd let out 20 tons of pollock that you just caught because you had too many, but you wanted to make sure your bag was full. And then it went on to Japanese trampers. So the weather got really bad in the Shelikof. It was like the most notorious icing conditions in the Shelikof. The night we delivered the last bag to that ship, and they said the temperature was 0 degrees and it was blowing 100 knots. And the weather was just like ice fog. And when the ship came by us to pick up our bag, he must have drove by us within 50 yards. You couldn't even see him. All we could hear was his exhaust, blah, 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 going by us. And then here comes the buoy. We pick the buoy, hook our bag up to it, let it go, and he'd pull it aboard. And the Japanese captain said to the 8 captains that were with us, which was the Hazel Lorraine, the Sea Wolf, the Ocean Dynasty, there was all the big crab boats that had converted for the first time ever to figure out how to catch these pollock. And so everybody's doing it, and the captain said, we gotta move, it's too cold. We were right off Poale Bay, which is a notorious spot for 100-mile-an-hour winds. And we all decided that we weren't gonna leave. The captains decided they didn't wanna leave. The fishing was too great, and we fished another few hours, and then they said they're not taking any more fish. So we all tried to jog to the beach to get out of the northwest that was coming over the Katmai and all through that country, and that's the pictures you see there. But anyway, that's me and the skipper, and we're all iced up, and we didn't even know what to do. And so we jogged towards the beach like we're all a mile off the beach, but we couldn't get to the beach. The skipper went to bed, he gave me the wheel, and he said, all right, just keep jogging. I'm looking through a little spin window you couldn't hardly see out of, and finally I woke him up, and he says, well, let's go out in front. And we looked, and there's like 8 inches, 10 inches of ice on the deck. And we're going, man. So all the boats decided that we were going to turn around and go the 30 miles across the Shelikof, open water, to the to the Kodiak side, because it was just too cold on the mainland. So we all turned around and went, and Mel Wick and the Alert were one of the smallest boats that were with us. He was about 80 or 90 foot. The Sea Wolf, which was a 125 foot state-of-the-art Marco boat at the time, 3 stories. Bob was saying, I can't get the boat to steer, the steering's not right, everything's going crazy here, it's too much ice. And so everybody decided they'd go out and chip ice off the boats to clear the deck. Well, here I am on this bender, which is the worst thing in the world you could be on. And the only good thing about that bender is the bulwarks were pipe. They had to have pipe rails around the bow. No 3-foot bulwarks like the Judy B has or all the Marco boats had. So we could take a big Colin bar and stick it down into 8 inches of ice, and you'd break off a flake as big as that table right there, and then just slide it off the bow. Well, all the other boats had to lift it over the bulwarks. And it was like, no way, and you were out there working and working. I was going right at the front of the house and the windows with a big bar. And I mean, there was so much ice, it was incredible. And we got it all off, and then we headed across. Next morning we wake up, and as we're going, one of the guys that I admired was the Alert. Mel Wick was the owner, and he had all Kodiak crew. And he's telling me on the radio, because I was on watch that night going back across, and he's telling me on the radio, he said, my doors are froze up, my antennas are breaking off, my radar's not turning, and he says, we're just too iced up. And it was like he was getting real depressed. And all the crew was, when that happens, for some reason, the crew all wants to go to sleep. Because they've been working all night, right? And they just want to, it's just like get in a bunk and just, forget this. And he's telling me that the radio, so he was breaking up on the antenna. We'll come to find out I was the last guy to talk to him. When we all get over to Halibut Bay on the Kodiak side, we all wake up in the morning, there's no alert. And we're going, holy cow. Well, they were all lost. The boat rolled over. I don't think anybody got out. And he, of all people, had a life raft built into his dash, an extra one. But I don't think he ever got it out of there to get it out of the boat because the boat was so frozen up. And it was a huge disaster to Kodiak. I mean, they were all Kodiak people. They were longtime family there. And the next morning, the captain of the Zuyo Maru, the big ship, shaved his head, because that was traditional. If you ever lost any other ship that was with you, that's what they did. And they searched for 3 days and never found anybody or anything. So that was kind of that's my Shelikof story. That's a picture of the Sea Star, I think, the 125-foot Marco or 108-foot Marco that was all iced up when we woke up in the morning. And as you can see, it's ice fog, so you can't even really, it didn't make a very good picture. The Alert, 82 maybe?
Okay.
Right in there somewhere. Hey, buddy boy. Anyway, so I guess next part I need to go to was the Judy B. Yeah, well, you can go back to it if you want, but anyway. So Kelly Brennan, who grew up in Halibut Cove, very good friend of mine, and I had been on this midwater pollock trawling, which I did not like. And I thought, oh my God, these guys are gonna kill this fishery because we're bleeding off extra fish. And it was so much fish in the Shelikof. And I'm thinking, how are they ever gonna do that? Now this North Pacific Council, they managed that, this was 30 years ago. They've managed that pollock resource. In the Bering Sea, those pollock fishermen are doing great. And it's still a very, very, very prolific resource to this day. And I thought, man, when I saw it in the Shelikof, I'm getting out of here. This is not gonna last any time for longevity. But in the Shelikof, pollock are pretty much, I don't know what that resource is doing now. But the Bering Sea, I mean, it's like amazing that those guys still catch that much fish every year, and it's still going strong. It's a very, very good resource. So anyway, when I decided I was going to get off of that, I decided that Kelly Brennan, who was over in Helmet Cove, he wanted me to start black cod fishing with him because he had a market in Japan. And the first guys that had a market in Japan were Jubilee Fisheries out of Seattle. And they had a boat doing it, and it was like brand new, freezing fish on board and sending them to Japan and actually getting money for it, and how you're going to get them to pay and all the rest of it. And so we jumped into it together, and we're trying to find a boat, and we couldn't find a boat. And like fishing season's going to start, and we don't have a boat. Neither one of us had a job. So I called up Arvid, who owned the Judy B in Seattle, and said, Arvid, what do you think? Would you ever consider you selling your boat? And it was right at the time when the king crab fishing in the Bering Sea took a real bad spike down. And Arvid was 50, his dad Agni Blendheim was 60, and his brother-in-law was 70, I guess. So he said, no, Pat, he said, I don't think we're ready to sell a boat. And I'm going, well, okay, I understand. And he said, if I did, I'd want $1 million for it. I'm going, holy crap, where are we gonna get $1 million? So Kelly and I are stumbling around, and we're talking to all these different boat owners and different things. And Kelly had already been doing it with the Kamishak Queen and been very successful. And at that time, I didn't know anything about black cod, except I knew how to do pots and all that sort of thing. And he was thinking because of the killer whales that we ought to go to pots. So we're going to take pots and go in the Aleutians and knock them dead, we thought. Wrong. But anyway, next thing I know, 2 weeks later, I get a call from Arvid Blendheim. And he says, my dad wants you and Kelly to come down here and talk to us. So we fly down to Ballard, go into a little old Norwegian community in Ballard. And I mean, we went in the living room with Dad, and his mom's name was Clarice Blendheim. His wife's name was Judy Blendheim, thus Judy B. The boat was named. And we go and sit down with the 80-year-old father and son and nephew at their table with the little doilies and the china set, and Grandma brings out the tea, and where's the beer, Grandma? And it's like, holy cow, we're telling them about what we think we can do. Lo and behold, they owner financed us for $1 million boat at 12% interest, because it was 10% plus 2 for interest. And we signed on the line. I was 30, Kelly was 25, and they let us have their boat. And then we had to convert a crab boat into a catcher processor freezer longliner, which is untanked. And from everything I learned when I was a kid running around crab boats, you do not move a crab boat out of the harbor unless it's tanked full of water, because the stability's gone. So I worked with Jensen Maritime and all the engineers to figure out the weight and the balance, and somehow or another we pulled it off. So that turned into our success. Everything else was kind of stumbling grounds. And when we had the Judy V for 23 years, I think, the 8 years before IFQs came into being, we were just fishing black cod wherever we could fish black cod. And I think, I haven't written in my logbook, but I think over those 7 or 8 years, we fished 280 days at sea with the boat. So, and we'd make 40-day trips, and I had another relief skipper, Rich Lauer, and sometimes I'd make 90-day trips, 240s. Some of the crew would make 2 40-day trips. And we'd come back to Dutch Harbor. Barbara would have all the stuff arranged to meet with the Japanese tramper. So we never went to the Dutch Harbor dock. We offloaded 40-pound frozen blocks of black cod right straight to the tramper. Then I'd go on board with the captain, sign the papers, and they were just anchored off of Dutch Harbor in the bay there, in Captain's Bay. And then Barbara would do all the bill of lading and up all night because the Japanese at the time versus our time and all that sort of stuff. And 2 weeks later, we'd get a check. And they were very trustworthy and treated us great, and had Barbara and I and Kelly and I over to Japan 2 or 3 different times. And Jay, you couldn't buy a piece of bubble gum. They spent, everything was paid for. And then when I went home, I looked at Barbara one day and I went, damn, that must have cost them $10,000. And then I went, I think we paid for that one way or another indirectly. So that's kind of what happened with the Judy B. Then a lot of these guys who, I got to make a shout out to everybody in this community. I mean, it has been amazing, the people that have reached out to me and helped me, like incredible. Even from my hometown that I grew up with at the high school, the stuff they reached out is just incredible. I mean, there's fishermen in my house every Friday, every Thursday at 5 o'clock. They have a little cocktail and we tell a bunch of lies like I'm doing now. And we just have a grand old time. And I mean, some of these guys, I haven't seen them for 30 years because when we turned Catch a Processor, we were brand X. We had no cannery. We had nobody to support us. So when we came to Dutch Harbor, we just went to the ship, offloaded our product, went to the dock, reprovisioned, changed crew in 5 days, and back out for another 40. And most of that time, I think one year we painted the anchor in, when they spray painted the boat, that real nice picture you saw of the Judy B. I don't think the anchor went down for like 3 or 4 months. We'd just stay offshore, and when the blows came, we'd just sit and jogged and waited for the weather to go by. And as soon as the weather went by, we started fishing again. And it was low after low after low. We'd leave here every year December 28th. So the crew didn't like it too much because they had to cut their Christmas short and get on a boat. And we'd be in Dutch Harbor on January 1, and there was great black cod fishing at that time right outside of Dutch Harbor by 6 hours. And we'd just run right out there in January 1. And one time we came by Shawlin Volcano, and the oranges running down into the seawater when we're coming by the volcano, and it was like, holy cow, you know. And we just, then the rest of our time for the next 20 years, we were basically in the Aleutians, except the Gulf was open for a month and a half. So, of course, we went and did that, but what I tell everybody is fishing in the Gulf of Alaska is like a pony ride in May sunshine versus fishing in the Aleutians. The Aleutian has tremendous current and coral bottom. And the bottom looks like the mountains you see right across there. Everywhere there, the whole bottom is very mountainous, underwater volcanoes and everything like that. So it's really, really hard to learn how to fish in that country. So we were one of the first ones that did it, Kelly and I, and there was Republic, Dewey on the Republic was out there at the time. He was one of the only halibut schooners, because most of the halibut schooners couldn't take that ice cold weather. The first year we had the boat, we overheated the engine and cracked the block. And the owners had a spare engine. We got shipped to Dutch Harbor, put back in. We're out there at out the spit in Dutch Harbor, which if you've ever been out there, you don't want to spend a lot of time there in the wintertime. But anyway, we had 33 crew members that year. They were jumping off of there like flies, you know, we broke down, pistons laying on the deck, and me and my other mentor, Herman Schmidt, who was a German engineer and a mechanic for all my engines, was there. And it was like the first year was tough. So, where am I going from here, honey? Oh yeah, that's right. So in 10 years, we had really good years. I think the 5 or 8 years before IFQ came in, designated by this council, and you know, they made all laws for everything in Alaska waters except for the 12 mile inside of 12 miles, which was state waters, went through fishing game. So that was mostly the salmon fishermen, and our fishery was 50 miles offshore all the time, on the edge of the whole Japanese current that runs from fair weather grounds all the way out to Attu. And so I lost touch with everybody. When I'd get home after 40 days, I'd get in the skiff and go right to China Poot. That's where I wanted to be. And I didn't get a chance to see very many of my old sailor friends and all my buddies, but those guys stepped up amazing. When I got home and injured, they all came to our rescue. Okay. So in 2007, I decided that the regulations, and the council members are here, but anyway, the regulations and the paperwork, I was ready to retire. I just didn't like having to fill out all the logbooks, and I'd get a fine for not signing my name right or whatever, and it was just like, oh my God. But anyway, I didn't want to do that, so I sold the Judy B to the Alaska Leader Group, which was some of the guys are here. I saw them tonight, and they were a much bigger, better operation than we were. And the agreement I made with them was, if you take the boat, then you got to take my crew, because I had crew members that were there for 10 years, like brothers to me, all of them. I mean, we were like tight, and they were excellent professional fishermen. So that was the whole key to my success. These guys, they knew more about the deck than I did, and I was just kind of like the green orange skipper that didn't know which way he was going. And during those years, we were putting in 800,000. We had one year we had 1 million pounds, but you know, it was like 300 days of grinding, and there wasn't a lot of good days, and there was a lot of days you had to wait for the weather. So yeah, so then I decided I wanted to retire. We sold the boat, and Alaska Leader took the boat over, and I bought the Bear, which was a repo sale, and then I spent 6 months refitting it, getting it set up the way I wanted to set it for halibut, and we had some halibut quota left. We sold all the black cod IFQs with the boat. I just didn't quite feel right about sitting at home and collecting a big check from whoever we sold the boat to for our share of IFQs, so we let them all go with the crew in the boat, and they went on to be successful with it, and they had better markets, and they were more worldly. We were like a little mom and pop organization. And from there, I got that Bear there, and when it came to be about August, I called Barbara up and I said, well, what do you think? I got to bring the boat back to Alaska. Why don't you come down and we'll take it up? And I'm thinking, oh my God, you know, is Barbara going to do this with me? And sure enough, she came down, and I'm thinking, we're going to run a 52-footer all the way to Alaska, just she and I. And we did, and it was like, it was
Fun.
45 days to heaven. I mean, all those years that I'd run back and forth to the Seattle shipyard with a boat, we'd never stop, 24/7, we're running. 10 days to get there, 10 days to get back. Well, Barbara and I took 45 days coming out of Seattle. And we had a shrimp pot, and a nice little wine bar, and a crab pot, and we'd stop every night, and I think we hit every hot spring in Southeast. And we'd see a place we'd like for 2 or 3 days. We just, oh man, it was great. And when I came around Gore Point, getting ready to come back to Homer, and I told Barbara, I says, gee, it's getting to be September, and I got to go get the halibut yet, you know, because that's the way we're going to write the boat off. And Barbara says, well, don't we want to go over to Kodiak now? And she has come across the Gulf, and I'm thinking, holy cow, she's really liking this. So then we thought, well, you know, we're going to go spend our month in the summer catching halibut, and then we're going to go, I'm going to take her out to the Aleutians, and I'm going to take her over into Prince William Sound and show her all these neat spots. And I was thinking, man, here comes the golden years, and wham bam, one car accident, rolled over, hit my head. Whole life changed, turned upside down. World went backwards, devastated my family. So, where are you on? Oh, no, we didn't. So you could go to the birds there? So anyway, I'll take you out in the Aleutians for a little bit and kind of tell you what that's like. Probably getting too long-winded here, but there are all kinds of seabirds. I mean, seabirds, unbelievable. And I've always been a birder. Barbara's been a birder, so I always had my Peterson's guide up in the pilot house, and I'm making sure what kind of birds we see and all the things we're looking at. And there's a crested auklet, and those things they'd pop up on the deck all the time while you're fishing. And the guys had a little box back in the bait shed, and they had a light bulb in it. and you can see he's kind of looking kind of wet, because when they're in the ocean, they don't get wet like that. But when they start bumping up against material objects like the bulwarks of the deck of the boat, their feathers get kind of ruined, and they can't. And they have to have a long takeoff range, so they can't get over the bulwarks and get out of the boat. The guys would pick them up and put them in a box for a day. They had a light bulb in there, and it was all warm, and they'd get toasty, and they'd only let them go at night, because if you let them go in the daytime, the sea pigeons would eat them right up instantly. And the sea pigeons are a fulmer, which I don't know if you have a picture of it. Of course, later on you'll see them, but right there, of course, you can see there's a tufted puffin on deck that we all love, and there's a goonie bird there that's known as the Lysan's albatross. And there's thousands of them in the Aleutians, and we took some photographers one year from France wanted to get on the boat and go make a movie about them. So we took them with us, put up with them for 10 days, and they made a goofy movie, and it didn't work out. Yeah. They made a movie on the tick and the flea that was on an albatross. Okay. So, anyway, this bird here is notoriously famous. That's the short-tailed albatross, which they told the fleet that was in the Bering Sea and the Aleutians, there was 3 left in the world. And if we caught one, the whole North Pacific fleet of longliners was going to be shut down. So we're all going crazy thinking, oh my God, and I could get out to Attu or Kiska and I'd see 20 of them. And they're around my boat. And I'm going, oh my God, how am I going to set my hooks over the stern without one of them getting caught? So we worked with Ed Melvin from the University of Washington, and he was the bird guy that was going to figure out the solution to stop the birds from picking your bait off the hooks when it went into the water. So we'd take some of their bird people with us, and we hooked and crooked, and after 10 boats involved in a year, we figured out that we had these rubber, like surgical cords hanging off the boat with a bunch of streamers on it, where the birds couldn't fly in and get the hooks, and it kind of eliminated the big problem. So then they backed off, and now there's lots of short-tailed albatross, but they're only on one volcano in Japan where they nest, and that's like a primo picture one. What?
They're still using the streamers.
Yeah, everybo's mandatory has to use the streamers now when you set gear. And the streamers hang out over the gear and make kind of a corridor that the boat can't, the birds can't get through.
These are just
I had a guy on the boat that was a really good photographer and a really good friend, so I take him around Dutch Harbor and let him photograph birds, and I've got all kinds of great bird pictures, but these are just surf birds around Dutch Harbor. And the next picture, Barb. And the next picture is storm petrels. And we had lots of storm petrels out there. We all loved them because they were real delicate, like a baby pigeon. And the guys would always have one of them in the box, trying to get them warmed up. And then, like I said, you had to let them go at nighttime because the fulmars were like by the thousands, and they were so aggressive that they eat them up if they saw even just the slightest bit of a flinch and not being right. And the fulmars were so thick out there. That's a fulmar right there in one of John's best photographs. He's been notarized all over different magazines for his photography. But they were so thick when you would be in calm weather like that at nighttime, and you'd be hauling black cod gear up at the roller, and the roller man had to see clearly in the water to be able to gaff the fish because they're coming one every 4 seconds if there's a fish on every hook. So he's got to be able to gaff the fish, put it in checker, get the next one. So you want to see down in the water to know what's coming. And there'd be so many fulmars around the gear thinking they were going to pick that little piece of herring off the hook as it's coming by, that it'd be like as big as this center of this counter here, just like thousands of them, and they're all clucking like chickens. And we hated them. And they made so much noise in the night, and you could tap your gaff against the steel boat, and one little clink of the steel, bam, they'd fly right away. But then they'd turn around and come right back. So they were a bit of a problem, but I better keep on moving here. I won't tell too many stories. Oh yeah, so the other interesting story, we were on the Pacific side of the Aleutians out by Amchitka. And I was hauling at night, which we tried not to do, but a lot of times you had to because the current was so strong that a guy couldn't be on the roller and driving into the current in the dark and figure out where he was going. So that takes me off the deck, puts me in the pilot house. I'm steering, I'm looking in the radar and I'm seeing these fuzzy things coming in radar almost like it's weather. Well, next thing I know, I look and it's shearwaters by the thousands. And next thing I know, they're hitting the rigging and hitting the lights, and I'm hearing them on the deck, and their little claws are scrambling all over the top of my pilot house on the aluminum. And I look out the back window, and the guy that's at the roller, he stopped the roller, which, like when you're a longliner, you never stop the gurney. Never stop the gurney. I mean, it's like if you stop the gurney, you're not making money. So you keep the gurney hauling. He stopped the gurney and squatted down and held his hands over his head because birds were just flying into him and hitting him left and right. And the other guys that were on deck were all getting hit, and they all went back in the bait shed. And this big, huge flock of birds just hit everything, everybody. They also dive under the water and swim. So you would be looking down in the water, and they'd be coming out of the water and up at you. I mean, it was like the birds. The guys were just going nuts. They were, well, we're not hauling, we're going back in the bait shed. And they all went back in the bait shed, and these birds kept coming. And I think, I wrote it down in my logbook, but there was like over 1,000 birds on the deck when they all came out and they were gone by. So the guys got the shovels out there, and they're shoveling them overboard, because you go to grab a seabird, man, and he's going to bite you bad. I mean, he doesn't know anything about being touched. So I go up on the bow, and here's a goonie bird up there. And I tell one of I say goonie bird, which is albatross. And there's albatross up there. And I tell one of my crew members, I go, well, I don't know. And he comes back and he says, I'm not touching that damn bird. And I'm going, come on, man. I said, I'll go get him. So I go up there to get him, and he starts clacking his beak at me. And I mean, this guy, he's big as a goose. And he's going to bite you hard if you don't watch out. So when he wasn't looking, I grabbed him right by the neck and whang, threw him right over the side. And he does about 15 steps across the water and takes off, and he was no worse for the wear. But anyway, but they will scare you. Okay, I know which way we're going. We're going to Dutch Harbor now. Show that next one. Oh yes, the glaucous skull there. That's one of John's photos. Yeah. And then there's the eagle in a crane in Dutch Harbor that I bet you that nest has been there for 25 years. And that crane has not been able to move because you can't mess with an eagle's nest, right? You can't. And there's a guy got $200,000 crane sitting there, and I bet you to this day that eagle's nest is still there. So it's kind of amazing to me. Now the next picture is of Priest Rock, which is the entrance to Dutch Harbor. It's like the iconic rock of the Bering Sea. When you come into Dutch Harbor, you're going to come by Priest Rock, and it's not a very good picture, as you can see, because it was in the fog. Priest Rock is always in the fog, and it's always blowing there. So it's like everybody knows, and it's supposed to be a picture of a bishop with his arms out, with his cape. And, the Russian Orthodox Church is right there in Dutch Harbor. And this Russian Orthodox Church, my relief skipper and I, we were, unusually, we were in Dutch Harbor on Easter Sunday. And he was religious and I was religious, and he says, well, let's go to church. I went, yeah, let's go to church. So we get up the next morning and we go to the Russian Orthodox Church. And we think, well, is it even open? Can we get in? Or, it's so iconic, And we go in there, we're the only two white boys in the whole place. And there was the whole mass was sung by the Aleuts in Russian. And the pictures and the gold and the stuff that was original from the day that was built there was just incredible. So it was a pretty unusual experience. I felt really honored to be able to do that. What are you going to next, Barb? Oh, so there's the Judy B coming into Dutch Harbor to unload in the wintertime, and I just offloaded 140,000 pounds of black cod to the Japanese ship. So then we come into town, we change crews, we reprovision, get groceries, and for we had 8 to 10 guys on the boat, so, and a great cook. It was, and a lot of you guys know Jack Hughes, Jack and Eileen Hughes. It was Jack's brother, Joe. And these are just good shots of John. We ought to roll on through those, huh? Big following sea, and you can't see it in the picture, but there's our Tory line that usually hangs up in the air and flags out, but the sea was so big behind us when the boat went down in the swell, then the Tory line would drag in the water. And as soon as the swell go by, it would pop up. Yes, in the bottom corner there.
Right.
Just some nice pictures of the Aleutians, and that's the way that Bering Sea looks all the time right there.
Wow.
These clouds, I love, they're lenticular clouds, and I noticed when we came in tonight, there was a bunch of lenticular clouds out at Augustine, and I always find them for fair weather for a couple, 3 or 4 days right behind it. So we were always happy to see those, but it scared us when the lenticular clouds got on top of the volcanoes. And you'd say the volcano was capping up, and everybody'd say, "You're gonna blow." So we'd always be real careful when they were doing that. And that's actually a picture that Barbara took out of my bedroom window of Homer and the spit in the back in the downground. You can't see it, but pretty phenomenal sunrise. These are the fog. You'd often see it in the Aleutians. That's a real common sight to see. The fog would be on the Pacific side or the Bering Sea side, and it'd be crawling over the mountains. And they say the Bering Sea in the summertime is 80% fog. So a lot of times you can see your masthead. If you crawl up there, you'd be in the sunshine. And it's just hundreds of miles of solid fog. And that's more Aleutian pictures. That you look at those mountains and you think, man, I just want to run up those barefooted. And it was all just low grass, no trees, never saw a tree. You know, the wind was so phenomenal there that it was amazing. That's Semisopochnoi volcano in Amchitka Pass there. And more pictures of that's right by Adak, that's Great Sitkin volcano. And that's Vezvidov volcano right by Chernovsky. The next one's, those pinnacles are kind of common to see all around the Aleutians like that. The rock formations just, you know, beaten by the coast and the waves, just like incredible. And this is where I thought I was invincible. That's me standing under that rock. Before I was injured, of course. I thought nothing could stop me. So we took that picture of me holding it up. And the next picture, if you see that rock in the bottom there, there's the Judy B in the background. Look at the size of the thing. So I'm Hoppy, I'm all the time asking him when he's out there because he's oftentimes in some of those same areas. And I go, is Christmas Tree Rock still standing? I mean, you look at the thing and it's conglomerate rock. And it's stones falling out of it all the time, and the waves are beating away at it. And that picture was taken, from a photograph, because we didn't have cell phones in those days. And I took a picture of the photograph to keep it. But I mean, it's like, I can't imagine the thing. I thought it was going to tip over when I was under it. And that's a picture of one of the crew members hauling on the Judy B when the Alaska leader owned it. And you just see the guy standing at the roller with a big wave coming right on him. So. It wasn't always pleasant there. This picture I really love because it's showing the true color of a blackcod. And if you can see, you can see that picture. It's kind of a dark green. And as soon as you cut the head off and throw them in the checker, they turn black. And all the crew members would always say, one of these days I'm going to have a Ferrari and I'm going to paint it blackcod green. And there's our buddy the whales, always at our side, always chasing us around. A huge menace. When Kelly and I started with the Judy B the first year, we bought blackcod pots, thinking because the whales were just such a menace. And he'd already experienced it. And to throw those pots down in the Aleutian with the Japanese current and the coral that was on the bottom, we lost almost all of it in a matter of about 3 months. And the current would take the buoys down to the bottom, and you'd have a 60-inch buoy. I can't hold my arms because I don't have any control over it, but as big around as I could reach, a 60-inch buoy, and we would web it. I taught my crew how to web it like the Japanese do, or I should say my Japanese technician that was on a boat taught us all how to web the buoy, and then you could throw the buoy over the stern, and you could hold it in 2 fingers with the boat running 9 knots, and it would break the surface tension, and the buoy would just float like nothing. You throw a regular buoy over that had no web on it, it was smooth, it would suck it so hard it'd pull it right out of your hand or pull you overboard. So we put it in the current, so the buoys wouldn't go down. Well, then when the current would get so bad, we'd have a hard ball, which is what draggers use, that the plastic material is about 1 inch thick. So it can go to the bottom on a trawl and come back up and not be damaged. So we put one of those on our buoy setup, and then we'd have 2 flags, have a flag and 2 buoys that were 60-inch buoys with web on them. Well, the buoys would go down, we come looking for them, and it's like, it's gone. Where is it? We'd wait for 12 hours sometimes till the tide was slacking. Boom, up pops the buoys, because we had the hard float on there. So everybody's happy. Oh man, we don't have to we don't have to stick gear. We're ready to roll. And we go get the buoy, and I pull up next to the buoy, and there's the buoy with no web on it. And I'm looking at it going, what the hell? And all the web was laying right beside of it, still in its diamonds that were about 3-inch diamonds, like you'd see on a glass ball that the Japanese did. And the buoy had gone so far down that it compressed to nothing, and it had squirted out through one of those little 6-inch holes. And the flagpole would actually have coral stuck in the flag, where it went down to 300 fathoms, laid straight out down at 300 fathoms.
Crazy. 300,
our other end was at 600. And we'd see them like that all the time.
Wow.
So that's kind of what we were dealing with. And then you start hauling it up, and you'd be getting fish like crazy, and you think, oh baby, we're in them, and next thing you know, here come a killer whale right beside you. And like all the fish go away, no more. Okay, we gotta keep moving. Oh yeah, so there's krill on the beach, which actually over in China Poo. And it happens over there this time of year. Every year, Barbara and I would see it. And we wake up in the morning and you hear the gulls just going crazy at a low tide in the morning. And you walk out there and there'd be a line of it, like a tide line, like the kelp does. And it'd be a whole tide line of krill. And the whales are here right now, and probably that's where there's krill around. I haven't been to China Poo to see if it's on the beach, but that's what the krill look like that the whales are after. This picture is one of my favorites, of course, because I'm standing butt deep in blackcod, and the way conventional longliner works, we tried to duplicate the halibut schooners, because as far as I was concerned, they were the best of the best, because they've been doing it for 100 years already before us. Why change it? So we did everything the same way. Rotation. Every guy had to be able to make his rotation. If you didn't make your rotation, you weren't a full share man. So if you got on board and said, oh yeah, I can do this, well, we'd know in about a week whether you could do it or not. And you couldn't keep up. And so a guy that's standing in the checker, like I am there with a green jacket on, you were expected to be able to do about 600 to 800 fish in a rotation. So if we caught 600 or 800 fish, when the last end came aboard, you were supposed to have your fish done and pick up and go bait your next gate, and everybody came out and scraped. Well, this was about 2,000 fish off of Cape Fairweather there, and I wasn't keeping up too good. So there's my nephew there, and some blackcod. See them, they're all headed there and ready to be scraped and gutted, and we caught a couple of brown crab, and everybody was happy then because that slipped into the pot, and I don't think we ever told Dims about it. And there's another good day. I think Kelly was running the boat for that one. And that would be a typical haul with blackcod, halibut, redfish, and everybody was happy when that was happening. And there's my son Pat sitting up front here. When he was 11, can you read that? What it says on there?
35.
And that was at Attu, and we caught. I mean we took the ear bones out. We sent them into Nims or Og Bay, and they told us that fish was over 120 years old. And so we took Pat when he was 11. That wasn't the smartest thing to do, to take a kid from Dutch Harbor to Attu, which was an 800-mile run. We were bucking into 45 knots. Everybody was seasick. And if you want to break a kid of fishing, go do that. So anyway, poor guy, and there he is out there with 8 professional fishermen, and he's the little guy. And I remember he'd wake up in the morning and he'd be putting his gloves on, his white gloves on, and he'd be coating his whole hands with that atomic bomb liniment, heating, for your sore muscles. He'd have both hands all coated with that, and then he's putting his gloves on, and I'm going, why aren't you out there on deck? And he's going, Dad, I got to get my hand in. So anyway, he'd be out there doing it, but he decided after looking at what we were doing when he was 18, it was like, I don't think I want to keep doing this business. But anyway, there's another, you can see John's name on that picture. I think he squirted it a little bit one way or the other, but to change the colors, but there's a bunch of rough hooligans with a bunch of giant blackcod. That's about as big as they get. So they were all hooping and hollering and raving over the big blackcod. I wasn't running that trip. There's my son Pat with a big halibut that they caught on the Bear, and I think he was running it for that trip. So those are his fish, not mine. And there's one of our crew members. I love that photograph right there. But he's hauling buoy line. You see, there's no hooks. So you got to haul 500 fathoms of buoy line before you can get to the anchor. And then you get to the anchor, and then you start hauling hooks for 2 hours. I mean, for about 2 hours, and then you get to the other end, and it's 600 fathoms of buoy line. And so, you know, he's kind of smoking his cigarette and getting ready to have to start hauling hooks. Okay, babe. And that's Pat with some more nice halibut on the Bear. That's when we were kind of thinking we were retired until I had a little car accident and screwed everything up. And there's a leased auklet on one of the crew members' shoulders. And they put those in a box too to warm them up. But you'd find the leased auklet in the big halibut. And those little auklets were flying down to 30 fathoms, you know. They fly on the water, you know, all those birds do. And they go down there chasing minnows, and all of a sudden, boom, a big halibut just jump right off the bottom and grab him right up. And we cut the belly open and find a couple rocks and a couple birds in his stomach. And that was life in the Aleutians, the way they did it. And there's another good halibut set there, and Pat with a great big monster there. And we'll go back to that one. Oh, you can't see the look on his face, but I don't think he was real happy that day. How come I always get the big halibut? I got to get down there. And this is a happy camper there. That's patting the fish on the Bear, and when the checker floods over and you start pulling fish back, because the checker can only hold so many fish, and then you pull the fish back down the side, and those are all 40, 60 pounders going back there, and everybody's happy when they're seeing those. This is my favorite picture because I like to see photographs of me standing. And that was the last, I think, yeah, that was the last halibut I ever gaffed. And I almost missed him. Look, I got a bad gaff on him anyway. And this is a picture from the house. Back in the early days, there was the whole Aleutian's covered in coral at 300 to 500 fathoms. And you know, you watch all the movies and shows you see on TV, and they're talking about the coral reefs, and you know, they're all 20, 30 fathoms, 60 fathoms deep. I mean, this stuff is so deep. I don't think very many people even knew it was there, nor did we. And we'd catch it on a hook once in a while and bring it to the surface. And if it was a rough day, you'd see this beautiful piece of coral hanging on the hook, and bang, it would hit the side of the boat and just shatter into 1,000 pieces and go to the bottom. So I had a tote up on the bow next to the anchor winch, and I filled it full of angel farts, which are those little white puffy styrofoam things that you use in packing. And I had that box full of them, and every time I get a real nice piece like that, I take it straight away and put it up there in that tote. And after a year, I had some really nice pieces. And then I came home, and Pat and I, the house had a design for a china cabinet. Well, we didn't have any china. It's like, what are we going to do with that space? So it was like 3 foot wide, and I said, well, we're going to build a dry aquarium and put glass over it and make this coral display. And we sent Barbara out of the house that day. It was just getting built. There was new floors. And Pat and I bought buckets of cement, chicken wire, and I made a scene that I thought the bottom of the ocean looked like. And then I had those mounted fish and the coral and made an underwater scene. And those are some of the most extravagant pieces of coral that you'll ever find. And that picture, you can see, is out the window through the house. And the black cod there in the front is got a tag on it. And we had names for all those corals. Now you see right above the black cod is a piece that kind of looks like a brain that we call brain coral. And on top of it is a little bitty crab that comes out of 500 fathoms. and it's called a spider crab. I think we'll see more pictures of that. Now that is a golden turbot, and you might catch, oh no, it's a blackcod, I'm sorry, that's what's known as skillfish. And I would say 1 in 700,000 pounds of fish, you'd see one of those. I mean, it's just real rare to see them. We'd always eat them, because we couldn't sell them. And they were a little bit like a mix between a blackcod and a snapper, but they were really good. And this turbot, a golden turbot, I mean, that's probably 1 in a million. And we fished turbot for a number of years as well, and he normally looks just like the color of a halibut. The same color as a halibut, except darker. And there's the spider crab that I was telling you was on top of the brain coral, and that guy right there would fit in a Folgers coffee can, a big coffee can. And there he is. Maybe you can see him right on the blackcod's, right over the blackcod's back of that little. I had one, you know, that came up and he was on a piece of coral, and I put him in a coffee can, protected him for a couple of years till I got all this stuff together, and then we made that dry aquarium in the house. And this was one that I almost took out of my case and brought to the North Pacific Council and said, BS. Because that blackcod right there has been gaffed in the side of the face, ripped his whole cheek off. And he had a tag on him, and he'd been living for 3 years. And you can see how rude his mouth looks in that picture. It looks like it's like a fake. But I had a guy make a mold of it out of fiberglass. You know, those fish you see in those pictures are made out of fiberglass. And pretty amazing how hardy. I mean, you catch halibut all the time, and you'll see the Halibut Commission calls them priors, because they've been caught before, and their lip might be messed up, or they might have a gaff hole in them. But they're so prolific on the bottom. They're amazing how strong they are. But I mean, that guy had his whole face ripped off, and he lived through it enough to eat more bait for another 3 years. Where are you, Bob?
I'm in the aquarium.
Oh yeah, so that's the inside of the aquarium, kind of showing you the design of the bottom that I was trying to duplicate. And we never done any of that before. We just took chicken wire and some cement and made a hell of a big mess in the living room. Barbara wasn't real happy with us when she came back home. But anyway, it's a dry aquarium, and you don't have to ever clean it, wash it, nothing. You can just look at it. And I can't turn my head that far. Barbara, you can read that for me, will you?
Well, I
She has
don't
no
have a
voice.
microphone. They can probably read. Can you read it? Can you see it?
No. Can everybody read that? Can you see that?
Yeah.
But when I saw that thing, I went, holy cow, how profound is that? And I don't even know who said it or who wrote it, and I never found out anything about it, so it's cast in bronze. And it's really true. I mean, I think the great thing about the North Pacific Council is they come here, they go to Sitka, they go to Kodiak, they try to make their meetings even in some of the villages, even in Nome. So the local fishermen can testify of what they know and what they see. And I think that's really, really important. I mean, scientific technology is one thing, but guys who live out there like we lived out there, you know it in a whole different perspective. So, and the council is really, really great about that, and I think that's why they've been so successful. And that's the end. My cocktail is on the